Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Neil, and today's session is Power BI. Hope everybody's having a lovely Sunday afternoon, and I hope that you can all focus in these interesting times. I'm sure that you're in just a different room from the rest of your family. In today's session, I'm going to try to give you as much value as I possibly can across a bunch of different areas. So Power BI is a new tool that is very similar to Excel in its scope. So in the same way that I could not teach you all of Microsoft Excel in 3 hours, of course, there's no way I can teach you all of Power BI in these 3 hours. But what I can do is focus on the major pillars of how Power BI works, of why you would decide to use it, and in ways that Power BI can actually impact the way that you work, even if you're not using Power BI. I know that sounds weird, but I want you to stick with me on this. It is absolutely possible for Power BI to improve your work without you ever opening Power BI, and I'll get to that in just a minute here. So again, my name's Neil. Throughout today's session, as Chris was just saying, make sure that you let me know anytime that there are questions, and I'll try to make sure that we get a nice round explanation of the way things are going. And as Chris said, let's go ahead and start off today with our first poll question. So Chris is going to pop up a poll question here, just gauging where everybody starts from. So when we talk about Power BI, where are you starting from? Just pick whatever is closest here. Are you not even sure what it is? Do you think you know what it is, but you haven't gone in there yet? Have you started to use it? Or are you pretty experienced with it and just feeling like you want more helpful tips, tricks, etc.? Where do you stand with your use of Power BI currently? Right. We'll leave that up there for a few more minutes, for a few more seconds, excuse me. Lovely. Okay, so it looks like the vast majority of you don't know what Power BI is, it's a great starting point for me. I love the fact that we can start at the ground floor and we're not, trying that thing where you're kind of skipping around and you're not sure whether everybody's with you or not. So I'm going to start at the ground floor with everybody. Looks like almost 70% of you are in the I don't really know what Power BI is all about camp. So let's go with that. So to begin with, this morning, anytime I start a class, I think it's morning. So to begin with this afternoon, what is Power BI and why do we have it in the first place, right? What is the point of having something called Microsoft Power BI? Well, of course, we have Excel. And if you're on this call, there is a very, very high likelihood that you spend a significant amount of your time in Microsoft Excel. And Excel, of course, is fantastic for dealing with data, for bringing data in, fixing it up, doing calculations, assessing what's going on in the world, and then maybe visualizing it. But if we have to stare it in the face, the reality of the situation is that almost everything that Excel has to offer us was fully formed by the time we hit the year 2000, right? I mean, you think about if you use VLOOKUP, if you use, sums and averages and things like that, of course, but even if you use more advanced calculations like index and match, or use SUMIF, or use logical functions, things like that, basically all your functions were there in the 90s. Pivot tables were there in the 90s. The ability to write your own macros using VBA, that was there in the 90s. And it's the year 2020 now. So you've got to assume that sometime in the last 25 years, some people have had interesting thoughts about how to better handle data, right? And then on top of that, a lot of you actually felt the transition for Excel when they went from having just a few thousand records available to over 1 million rows available in the spreadsheet, right? Oh, we have 1 million rows in our spreadsheets now, hooray! And when I was teaching it, I was like, why would anybody want to do that? That sounds terrible. And the reality of the situation is, even if you are using a version of Excel that has a million rows available to you, if you actually use a million rows in Excel, you know what's going to happen to your spreadsheet. It's going to crash and burn. You start doing calculations on a million rows, and Excel is going to crash more often than not. So even though Excel is absolutely a Swiss Army knife, it can do almost anything, you realize that a Swiss Army knife is just a pocket knife a couple of inches long, right? And there are probably better tools for handling big data. So in the world, there came along Tableau and Alteryx and Crystal Reports and Cognos and every other type of data handling application on the face of the planet, right? And in this situation, you think to yourself, as Microsoft, how are we going to stack up against all of this new technology? And that's really where I want you to put yourself in the headspace of. Yes, Excel does a lot of things really well, but most of Excel is kind of a dinosaur. And so if a new, bigger, badder thing comes along, it's probably going to be better than Excel at handling different types of situations, especially things like big data, things like really complicated dashboarding, stuff like that, right? Okay, so you're in this headspace. You realize that Excel is up against it. And you ask yourself, well, what should we do as Microsoft? Well, what Microsoft did is, across the suite of different development teams, a bunch of different projects were sort of boiling, right? And they were figuring things out. And three major projects sort of rose to prominence. And so across the years from 2005 to 2015, these three projects, one called Data Explorer, one called Project Gemini, and one called PowerView, really started to form up. Okay, so we have Data Explorer, we have Project Gemini, we have PowerView, and they're all about different parts of handling data. Data Explorer, can you tell by the name? Data Explorer is about, okay, well, I might have this spreadsheet over here. I might have this database over here. I might have the CSV file over here. So how am I going to explore all of those different elements and maybe bring them together, right? So the Data Explorer project, you can kind of see where they're going with that. Project Gemini, of course, nobody has no Project Gemini, okay. Project Gemini was about being able to do calculations and things like that in a really sophisticated way. And Power View, you can kind of see where that's going. You're going to view the data, so that's about visualization. So this is really three stages of the process. If you think about your life inside of Excel, right? Think about the stages of your work. The first thing you have to do is, well, I have this spreadsheet that came in from this department, or I have this database that spits out a report, or whatever it is. Okay, so I get that data in. Is that data ever right when you get it? Almost never, right? That spreadsheet that comes in from one of your departments that you're looking at is probably 50% garbage. And if you get one of those reports dumped out of a database somewhere, oh, a lot of times those things are just atrocities, just awful to look at. So you got to fix those things up. Then, once you bring all that stuff in, you have it all cleaned up, you're ready to go. Now it's time for us to do our calculations. Oh, I need to add this, I need to look this up, yada, yada, yada. And then once you've figured out whatever the insights are, then it's time to visualize it. It's time to create a report and let your boss know what they're supposed to do with this information. So those are the three steps of the process. And what happened was this. Those three projects became Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View. And those three power tools got wrapped up into Power BI. So that is the first thing to understand here, everybody. Power BI was born because Excel is old, and while it still does a ton of things that are valuable, It doesn't do everything the best way. It doesn't handle big data very well. There's probably going to be a better solution, right? And so these independent tools of Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View each handle one of the three major things that a spreadsheet or something like that would need to be able to handle. And then they packaged it all up and they called it Power BI. And so once again, Power Query's job is bring the data in, fix it up, maybe compare it with some other data, maybe combine it, maybe take two tables and tie them together, maybe do some VLOOKUP. Then we have Power Pivot. Notice here I put VLOOKUP under both of these. It kind of does it in both of them. We have VLOOKUP and we have calculations in Power Pivot. And then in the third one, we have visualization. We have the building of charts. So right here, everybody, let's take a second. Second poll question of the day. What percentage of your time spent on dealing with data is on that first column right there? Because I have a theory. My theory is that ETL, what Power Query does, extracting the data, transforming it, cleaning it up, and then loading it to be calculated on, that's the stuff that is a huge waste of our time. And if we spend too much of our day on bringing in this database dump and going, oh, why is it so awful? We're probably frustrated. We're probably wasting time. We're probably dealing with this for way too long. So when we think of the three components of Power BI, what we're going to talk about here is the first stage of the process, Power Query. And it looks like, I would say, the vast majority of people spend in excess of 20, 25, 30, 40, 50% of their time on this, right? So we're looking at a huge part of your job is frustrating, is monotonous, is tedious, right? Now, if I told you, hey, your job is to do a calculation, your job is to compare two things against one another and figure out which thing is bigger or smaller and why that is, or your job is to make a chart illustrating the thing that you found, you'd say, okay, cool, I can make those things happen. But when I tell you your job is to pull in the stuff out of this database and fix it, ooh, so much of that is just hands-on, labor-intensive grinding, right? So what I think of as being probably the most important part. So when people get into Power BI, the first thing they see is Power View, right? They see the charts and they go, ooh, look how fancy the charts are. This is amazing, right? Look how beautiful this is. And Power BI definitely makes some really beautiful visualizations, some great reports and dashboards and things like that. But I think the most valuable thing Power BI has going for it is the time you can waste on ETL, on cleaning up the data, is not going to be wasted anymore, because Power Query is going to solve a ton of those problems. Before I go hands-on, everybody, I want to make this point multiple times this afternoon, because there is a substantial percentage of you who don't know what Power BI is. So I'm going to assume that on Monday, when you have some work thing that you've got to do, you're not going to open Power BI. Instead, you're going to open Excel. And if that's the case, I need you to know that immediately, tomorrow, you can use what you're learning right here today, even if you don't open up Power BI. Excuse me. And the amazing reason that is because when Microsoft developed Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View, Microsoft took Excel and they plugged Power Query and Power Pivot into Excel. So what I want to show you here to begin with, we're going to go into Power BI and we're going to go into Excel. And I'm going to show you that the exact same tools for cleaning things up, fixing problems inside of your data in Power BI is available to you today if you go into Excel. Okay? So let's, oh, before I do that, sorry, there's one more slide. So just to reiterate here, Power Query, the first stage of using Power BI, is the following three things. Extract. So the extract part of ETL, extract, transform, load. What does this mean? It means that if you have frustration about going to a database, about going to a spreadsheet or a CSV file or a website or wherever that is to get the information that you need, that part is the extraction. And Power Query makes it easier to extract data. The second part is the part that gets all the glory, and that is the transformations. If you use text to columns, if you use text functions and date functions, if you manually go in and fix the data, copy and paste it into new locations, if you manually create VLOOKUPs to combine the data together, I want you to stop everything and watch this next part, because the transformations that you can do in Power Query tomorrow are astounding. I need you to hear that very clearly. And then the last part of this is load it into the data model so that Power Pivot can go on with the next stage of the process. Okay, so everybody, item number one, if you've never had Power BI open before, this is Power BI Desktop. Anybody who wants to can download Power BI Desktop with a Microsoft account and kick the tires on it. And just as a point of reference here, I pulled up this website just before class started. Excuse me, I'm going to mute myself just for a second, take a drink. So I pulled this up just before class, just so you can see it. Power BI, you can run on a test trial basis. And then if you notice over here, $10 a month for Power BI Pro, and then big enterprises can get Power BI as a huge subscription model for the entire business. And you can do a ton with just the kick the tires version of Power BI. So definitely, you know, when you get a chance after this, go ahead and download Power BI for yourself if you haven't already done so. If you do, as you can see, mine is open here. And the first thing you'll probably see is a screen that says, do you want to get some data from somewhere? That sort of thing. Okay, so Power BI right now does not have any data in it. So we need to get some data. And you can see up here in the top left-hand corner that I have a button that says get data on it. Okay, so I could go to the get data button. I could pull the data in. This is the extract part, right? Is the data in an Excel file? Is it in a Power BI data set that we have somewhere? Is it in a SQL Server database, a CSV file? Is it on a website? Where is it? And you notice right down here at the bottom, we have this capacity to choose more as well. So there are tons and tons of different possible options for where you can get the data from. Okay. Now, before I move forward on this, I want to show you what I was talking about in Excel. So this is my Excel right now. I have Office 365 in Excel today. If you have Office 2016, 2019, or Office 365, you have Power Query right now. You have it. If you have Office 2010 or 2013, you have to go online, do a quick search for Power Query for Excel 2010 or 2013, and you'll get a Power Query tab. But for those of you who have Office 2016, Office 2019, or Office 365, I want you to notice, oops, sorry, one second. There we go. I want you to notice right over here that we have this Data tab, and on the Data tab, right here is a button that says get data on it. Huh. That's the exact same terminology they use in Power BI. That's interesting. And you'll notice you can get the data from a CSV file, from a website, from a table or range. If I click onto the Get Data drop-down menu, you'll see from a workbook, from a CSV file, from a database, from a whatever. So this Get Data functionality in Excel 2016, 2019, and Office 365 is the same as the Power BI Get Data option. So that's what I mean when I tell you that you can use this stuff that I'm telling you right now in Excel tomorrow. Okay. Now, okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure I was seeing what Chris was telling everybody. Good deal. All right, so if I go to the data tab and I go to get data from file, from workbook, or any of those other things, I'm going to be using Power Query in the same way that I'd be using it in Power BI. Now, Power Query's job is to extract data from various sources and then fix it up. That's the transformation part of things. So what I would like to do to begin with is demonstrate the power, the sheer beauty of using Power Query instead of using Excel natively to solve a bunch of different problems. So right over here, I sent over this a zip file that has a folder in it called Power Query Transformations, that has in it a folder called O1 Cleanup. And so if you want to open this with me, you can. You can see here I have this spreadsheet called Cleanup Examples. Okay. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go into these different tabs and just storytell for a moment, because I want you to feel what I feel about this. And that is, how would you normally handle this problem? So here I am on the filling tab of my cleanup examples. Okay, let's look at it. If I tell you that it's your job to find out everybody who attended the class CRS 1057, how would you do that? Because as you can see right here, instead of, what a pivot table or a sum if function or something like that would ask you for, which is to have a little label right here, right? Do we have a label for Kareem Salem that says what class he attended? No, it does not. They decided to do what's called pivoting the data, where you have just a single row up at the top letting you know about this person, or excuse me, about all the things that fall underneath it. But the problem is that even though this is okay for display purposes, this is terrible for the purposes of being able to find everybody who fits a qualification, right? Or you say to me, hey, could you show me a list of everybody who attended a class on the 5th? No, I can't. I cannot do that because it only says the 5th at the top of the set of records, right? And then over here, if I go to unpivoting, see the problem again. If we look at a column like the column for country over there on the left, right there, and we see that United Kingdom needs to be filled down, that's a common problem in the data that we're working on, okay? And the other thing that you're going to see while we're here is right over here, these columns. It is very common to split the data that is all similar in nature into multiple columns, but that makes it more difficult to find what you're looking for. If I tell you that you're looking for a sales value, if I tell you that we're looking for an expense value or something like that, you would really rather be able to look in one column for that number. But right now, depending on which quarter we're talking about different columns. So we've got to be able to fix this data up a bit to be able to see what's going on. Okay. Next one up, this one right here. Okay, everybody, I want you to feel this pain with me for a moment, okay? Feel this with me. You see this data that's in front of you? You see how it has two records, two people's names in the same cell right now? And normally you could say, yeah, I'll go text to columns with this, right? I'll split it so that Maryam Islam is in the first column and Yasmin Farouk is in the second column. So that Yasmin Farouk is in the first column and then Mu Hang is in the second column and all the way down the line. But what happens when you do that? Well, some of these actually have three instructors, right? So now we have three columns, one for Sheng Ting, one for Elena Finlayson, and one for Candela Alvarez. Oh, okay, so now I have 3 columns. Now I have 4 columns. Now I have 5 columns. And text to columns is not sounding that good right now. You know what I'd actually like is to be able to make a row for every instructor to say, here's all the classes that Candela Alvarez taught, and not have Candela Alvarez's information in a bunch of different cells all over the place. So I hope you can see the types of cleanup frustrations that Excel just would not handle very well for us today. Okay, I see there's a question in the chat real quick here. If I have Office 365, but I don't see the data options, well, you know, I'll tell you this. If you have Office 365 and you go to the Data tab, you should have a group on the far left that says Get and Transform Data. That's really just part of the package. So you might want to look at different configurations that people might have rolled out. You might have talked to somebody in IT. If you're looking at the Data tab and you don't see an area on the left that mentions queries and connections, you see this right here. We have, whoops, we have right here queries and connections and get and transform data. If you don't have these areas on your data ribbon, definitely talk to somebody in IT and make sure you know why they're not sitting there, because that's a strange configuration. All right, looking good. Lovely. So here's what I'd like to do with you, everybody. I'd like to show you how you solve this problem in Excel and how you solve this problem in Power BI. Because like I said, I want every single person on this call to be able to do something with what you're about to learn tomorrow, okay? Tomorrow you should be able to do this. So if you're doing this with me, I'm going to start with the filling tab. Okay, so I have all of these course attendees right here, and I'm going to do it natively in Excel. So if you have the get and transform data options in Excel, you can try this out with me. If you want to watch me, that's great too. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to click somewhere on the data. And we realize that we have to fix it, right? Now, I told you that Power Query is an ETL application, meaning extract, then transform, then load, right? So what's the extract part? The extract part is tell me where the data is. I don't care where it is, tell me where it is. Well, in this first example, it's staring you in the face, right? It's not difficult, it's right there. So extracting is not that exciting here, but if I click somewhere on the data and I go to my data tab up here at the top of the screen, I have from a table or range right over here on the left. Does everybody see that? So the data tab, get and transform data from a table or range. So the table or range that's right there in front of my face, I go over here to click on it, and I click OK. And what's going to happen here is it's going to extract the data off the spreadsheet and push it into Power Query. All right, so everybody, this is Power Query. How's that work for everybody? You are now in Power Query, and you can see that through the Power Query editor right up here at the top of the screen. See how it's labeled Power Query Editor. So you did an extraction. Life is good. Now what transformations do you need? Well, what I really need is I just need each one of these 3 columns, the course title column, the course delivery column, and the course date or time column. I need the information from those columns to be filled down so that the label for the course title is not just at the top, but it's in every single row. And the same thing for course delivery, and the same thing for the date and time of the course. Okay, and here's how you do that. You click on the column that you want, and right up here on the Transform tab is this great button called Fill. You know what that does? It takes whatever's in that column and fills it down for you. If you have 75,000 records that need to be filled, do you want to do that by hand? I don't. How long are you going to be clicking and dragging to solve that problem? Watch how fast this is. I choose down, it fills down. I click on course delivery, I choose fill, down, it fills down. I click on course title, I choose fill down, and it fills down. Ta-da! Magic, right? So that's one type of transformation. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you had that problem, this example right here saves you several minutes, just like that. And now, what do? We go back to the Home tab, and if we've done our transformation, right? So we have pulled the data in, we've worked on it, we did something to it. Now it's time to load it, ETL. Now in Excel, that means put it on the spreadsheet. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose close and load to, and I'm going to put it right there on the spreadsheet next to the first one. All right, let me try that out, everybody. So I will hit close and load to, and then it's going to ask me where I want to put that data. So I'm just going to go over here and say in the existing worksheet right over here, but you could put it literally anywhere you want and hit OK. And there you can see that you have queried the data on the left and used it to create the data on the right. Okay. So that is Power Query in Excel. Let's go over to Power BI and use it there. Okay. Let's see here. Let's see. Terry's asking a question. What if you have several courses in the first column? Oh, sorry, Terry, let me go ahead and illustrate exactly what you're asking about. So everybody, let's look over here at the course title column. You see this? You see how the course title column has many courses in it? So this question that came in from Terry just a moment ago, that's exactly the right question to ask, Terry. Fill down, what does it actually mean? It means fill down until you run into the next thing. And then when you run into that, take that item and fill it down. And then take the next item and fill that down, boom, 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 all the way down the list. So everybody, let's look at what actually happened here to Terry's point. So I have course title 1057, the delivery 105701, and it was delivered on the 4th. So I'll scroll down here. Now I have 105702 that was delivered on the 5th. And then I have 105703 that was delivered on the 6th. And you can see right over here on the side, I have precisely that. I have this, whoops, sorry, one second. You can see that every time it runs into a new record, right here we have from 01 to 02. So CRS 0157 stayed the same, but it moved from the first delivery on the 4th to the second delivery on the 5th. So it's still filling down. You see this? It's still filling down 1057 because it hasn't run into anything new in this column. But in this column, it did run into something new. It transitioned from the 01 thing being filled down to the 02 thing filling down. Yeah, Terry, I'm right there with you. All of this, I cannot tell you how excited Power Query makes me. I tell people this very regularly, everybody. There are tools that I teach as a Microsoft instructor that I know somebody out there will find interest in, and I think to myself, well, I'm going to do this for them, just for you. I'm going to try this out. But I have now had enough consulting clients where these types of problems have come up that every time I see something new that Power Query can do, it makes me cry because it is so freeing to know that those kinds of frustrations are not real problems anymore. Okay, so now let's do the exact same idea here, but do it from Power BI. What I wanted to do right here, and what I want you to keep in your head, is that, again, if you go back to Excel, first of all, for those of you who have 2010 and 2013, listen to what I'm saying. If you have to go to your IT staff to ask them about this, please do. You can just go to Google and Google Excel 2013 Power Query add-in, and it will take you to a Microsoft site where you can install it. You'll have all the Power Query features. If you have 2016, 2019 or Office 365, and you have it right here like I do, you should just have a data tab. You should be able to do everything we're about to do in Power BI, but you should be able to do it in Excel. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this Excel spreadsheet. And now I'm going to go into Power BI and do the exact same thing. Everybody with me? So I'm in Power BI. I go to the Get Data button. And I know that the data I'm looking for is in my Excel spreadsheet. So I go over here to the Excel spreadsheet and I say, yeah, let me go find it for you. Okay, so there is my spreadsheet called Cleanup Examples. Great, so I open up that and it says, cool, from what I can tell, here we go, you have a bunch of different tabs in there. Let's go to the filling tab right here. And you see right here in Power BI, the first thing it does is says, this is what I'm seeing. Is this what you're expecting? I say, yeah, not the filling one. Text issues, not that one. Let's go to unpivoting. Okay, so I look at the tab for unpivoting and I say, yes, that's the one that I'd like to query. So I click the little checkbox for that. Remember, when I was in the spreadsheet, all I had to do was click on the data and say, let's use this. But now I'm outside the spreadsheet. And now I go over to the spreadsheet and I say, let's query this, right? Let's use Power Query on this. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner, bottom right-hand corner, you see that I have the question, do I want to load this or do I want to transform this? I almost always want to transform this because it's almost always garbage, right? It's almost always not right yet. So we need to transform the data to make it right before we can load it. Oops. Sorry about that, everybody. Here we go, get data from Excel, from that workbook, and I grab the data from unpivoting right there, lovely, and I transform the data. So once again, everybody pay real close attention to what this looks like. This is your Power Query editor. Does it look basically identical to what you just saw me use in Excel? Absolutely. That is a good thing. I'm very happy about that. Next up, what do I need to do? All right, so I'm looking around and I look up at the top and I say, okay, well, the first thing that I notice is that right over here, these labels right here, country, company, fiscal year 19, etc. These things right here should all be the column headers. Everybody see that? We need to push those up into this area up here at the top. So I'm going to use this to label each of the columns so I know what the columns are. So what I'll do here is I will first go to the home tab. Let's go to the home tab at the top of the screen. Go to remove rows and remove the top rows. So on the home tab, remove rows, remove the top rows. And I'm going to tell it that I want to get rid of the first row in the data set. Okay. So remove top rows and remove one row. And then hit OK. All right, so we're close, right? We took that extra row out. So that means that country and company and fiscal year 19 Q1 and fiscal year 19 Q2 are really, really close to the headers up at the top. And now on the home tab right over here, it says, do you want to use the first row as headers right there? So that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to say, take that first row and make it the headers of all the columns. So I click on that, and now we're looking pretty good, right? This is a good starting point. What we've effectively done now is said, hey, there's a spreadsheet with all kinds of random junk on it. Let's make sure that we focus on the right junk. Now, you know what I'm about to do with the country column. because I did it in my last example, I'm going to go to my Transform tab and use Fill Down. And what happens here, to Terry's point from earlier, is it fills United Kingdom down until the next country, and then it fills that country until the next country, and then it fills that country until the next country. So I hit Fill Down, and there's the United Kingdom, and I can see that there's the United Kingdom and a bunch of other countries as well. Okay. I don't want to beat you over the head with this, so let's just agree right now. Neil is right. If I can use all of these incredible features in Excel, I should probably experiment with that when I get back to my office or just, get back to work, right? All right, next up, we have filled this down. The next thing that I'm interested in is this. Let's say that you make the judgment call that you want to take all of these, oops. Well, first of all, notice over here, it's got a few extra columns over on the right. I'm just going to go ahead and click on this column, hold down Shift, click on this column, and remove those columns. And now we're doing well. We're back to Q1 through Q4. Now everybody take a second, and I want you to imagine, what would you do if I told you, okay, instead of 4 columns labeled Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, I need you to make a column with all the amounts, and next to it, a column that says Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, for each of the companies in every one of the countries. How long would that take you? I'll wait. How long do you think it would take to accomplish that? Now everybody watch this. I want you to soak in the beauty of this moment, okay? I come up here to the Transform tab, and there's a button that says on it, Unpivot Columns. And that's what does it. The only thing I'm going to do is push this button. That's the only thing I'm going to do. Everybody ready? Push the button. Ta-da! Do you see that? For the United Kingdom, for the company called GRBR, for fiscal year 19, Q1 through Q4, here are the 4 amounts. And then for the next company, and then for the next company, and then for the next company, and then for the next And this is just the easiest thing I have to show you, everybody. Think of the possibilities. Think of all the transformations that have ever frustrated you in your entire life, and just think to yourself, can I do this better, faster, easier? Yep. Exactly. Yeah, Chris is saying, it wouldn't take me any time at Excel because I would give up on that assignment. I'm right there with you, buddy. All right, so now I can take this column and I can call this column the period, and I can call this column the amount, and I'm set, right? I have done my transformation. Life is good. So let's pull in some more data here, and let's keep looking at different problems that Power Query can solve, whether we're talking about Excel or we're talking about Power BI. So up here on the Home tab, I can go to the Home tab and say I want a new source, right? And grab it from an Excel file again. This is our second time grabbing from the Excel file from Power BI, but we're going to shift it up here as we keep going. So I go here to Excel. Excel pops up. Yes, there's my cleanup example spreadsheet right there. And now I am going to bring in the text issues sheet right here. So again, everybody, let's take a look at what the problem is before we get into it. The problem is that I want to break up the instructor column. Now, you know that you have text to columns. Text to columns could split every time there's a semicolon, but the end result wouldn't be what you were looking for. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to try out Power Query in solving this issue. So I click OK. It brings that into Power Query right here. There we go. And let's talk through it again. The first thing I'm going to try to do is make sure that there are headers at the tops of all the columns, right? So right now, I have this null row right here. So I'll go to remove rows right here and remove that first row. So yeah, remove the one row up at the top and hit OK. Okay. And then the second thing I'm going to do is use the first row as headers. So course, date, and instructors needs to go to the top row. So click on first row as headers. And looking good. Okay, so that's the starting point. We now have a table in Power BI in the Power Query editor that we could do something with. Now watch how easy this next thing that we're going to do is. We're going to click on this column for instructors right here. And I definitely want to what's called split the column. So those of you who are really experienced with Excel, you know very clearly that text to columns on the data tab is a thing you can use, no problem at all. Stop for a second. Those of you who have used text to columns on a semi-regular basis, just look at the options that are on my drop-down menu here that aren't in Excel, just by default right here. Have you ever wanted to be able to split it anytime it went from capital letter to lowercase letter or lowercase letter to capital letter? Have you ever wanted to split it every time it went from a number to a letter or a letter to number? You just can't do that in Excel. You have to come up with really complicated functions to solve that problem, but Power Query has it right here. Just it's on the drop-down menu. Now that's not our problem in this example, but it's really nice that those options are available to us, right? Okay, so that's nice. Very fond of that. But what we're going to say is that yes, there is a character that's being used to split the columns from one another. So I'm going to click on by delimiter. That's the breakpoint right there. So I choose by delimiter, and right down here, I say that my delimiter is a semicolon. Okay. Now you can do this right up until this moment in Excel, but the problem with Excel is now you will have 2 or 3 or 4 or 17 columns for all the individual pieces. What if you don't want to go horizontally? What if you want to go vertically? Well, that's where, right here, you click on Advanced Options and you say, please split it into rows for me. That's it. You just choose split it into rows, and then hit OK. And now you have an individual record for every single instructor for each of those different courses. Takes no effort whatsoever. Does that make sense to everybody? Are there questions, troubles, or concerns to this point in the process? Looking good. Okay. So the first part of dealing with data coming into Power BI is to transform that data. And I will just say it this way. I hope that already in our exercise, you have seen examples that call to mind, oh, this is definitely better than what Excel can do. And it's really just better than what Excel can do because Excel was invented in the 80s and they hadn't thought all that stuff through. And now that we've had 40 years worth of development time, people are saying, hey, you know, if we could make this thing, it would be great. So they just made it just like that. Just not nearly as interesting as that song is, right? All right, good afternoon. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to round this session out and get you guys on your way. So let's go into talking about using Power BI on a fresh setup. As you can see, I've closed everything that we were doing up until that point. And we're going to start off with an exercise that's going to allow us to bring data in, clean it up, establish relationships, create calculations, and then finally do visualizations on it. So let me just show you all the stuff. You all have these files. They were emailed out in a zip. As you can see, there is a 2018 expenses folder. There is a 2019 expenses folder. There is a revenue folder. and there's an account mapping, a department mapping, and a calendar. Now, the first thing I'd like to point out to you is something I didn't do during the Power Query session is query a folder. It's incredibly useful because, I'll say this about previous examples. I have had plenty of situations now where the idea was to distribute a spreadsheet to all the different departments, right? And then all the different departments were supposed to submit their spreadsheet to a central person, and then they were responsible for combining all that information into a single spreadsheet, maybe in multiple different ways. And then the problem would always arise that one of the departments, 3 of the departments, 10 of the departments would change what they had in the spreadsheet and send you the updates, right? Now you have to pull out all the things that you currently have from that department, replace it with new stuff. So what I'm about to do here is I am going to query an entire folder. I go in here to Power BI, go to Get Data, get the data from More right down here, and you'll see that one of my options is a folder. Come on, here we go. And anything that's in a folder, as long as it all adheres to the same guidelines, will be brought in and appended together. So I'm going to browse, I'm going to look for my Power BI files here. There we go. There we go. So here's all the 2018 expenses. Click on the 2018 expenses folder, hit OK, hit OK, and I can scan through this, right? When it comes up, it'll say, currently, I see that there are 12 different departments worth of expenses. What would you like to do with that? I'll go to Combine and Transform. You see right down here, the Combine drop-down menu has the opportunity to combine them together and load them into Power Query so I can take a look at them. So I choose that, Combine and Transform, and just like that, here we go. It asks me, okay, it looks like there's an expense table in this first file. Yes, that's exactly what I want. And I can go through all the different departments here and make sure that everything's looking good and that it's choosing the right information. And then I hit OK. And now it's going to append all this data together really quickly. Gotcha. Oops. So there you go. You can see that not only does it append all of these columns right here, but it creates an additional column for the source name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hopefully, that all the different files were named something that was an identifying factor for this. So I'll go ahead and split this column by the position, or the, let's say, the delimiter. And I'll say I'm looking for a space, the rightmost delimiter of the space, and hit OK. And right there, there's my department column. And here is a column I don't need anymore. So I can remove that. So now this is all of my 2018 expenses brought in from a folder with almost no effort on my part. Now I'll do the same thing again. I'll go to New Source, pull it in from a folder, and bring in all the 2019 expenses. Here's my folder option, connect to it, browse for the 2019 file, and hit OK. Combine and transform the data and do basically the same thing. Make sure that that expense table is coming in. split that column right over there. I'm going to go split column by a delimiter on the rightmost space, hit OK. And this is now the department column, and this is a column we don't need anymore. Okay. Now we have all these different departments coming in, and we might want to map the departments to what division the department is in, or who's in charge of that department, or any other relevant information. And we have the account information. We might want to connect that to the information about the different types of accounts we have. So again, I can go to new source, grab information from a spreadsheet. And when I go back in there, that's why I have this account mapping spreadsheet right here. So there's all my accounts. And remember, with Power Query, I can clean this up. I can remove the top row and then use the first row as headers. And I can get rid of any extraneous columns I don't need by selecting them and removing the columns. Now, I could use that merge feature that we talked about a little while ago to bring the data in, but I think what we're going to do instead is we're going to just establish their relationships. Okay? So what we'll do here is leave it alone inside a Power Query. I'm just going to bring in one more. I'll leave aside the departments for right now to save you guys a little time and energy here. I'm going to go over here to the calendar. So earlier today, somebody asked the question about fiscal quarters and things like that. And I want to really demonstrate how much power you have over this. So what I'm doing here is bringing in a spreadsheet. And I just want you to look at what I'm bringing in here. What I'm bringing in is literally just a bunch of dates in a gigantic column, no other information. It could be a calendar that has fiscal years and things like that defined, but watch how easy it is for me to define those things for myself. So here is a date column. And remember, on the Add Column tab at the top of the screen, we have tons of different things that we can pull out of this very, very easily. So for instance, I can go to my date drop-down menu and I can get the year, right? So I now know whether the year is 2005 or 2006 or 2007 for each of these. I can go back to that date and pull the number of the month, right? So the month is the number of the month. So I'll call this, I'll call it month number. But I can also go to the actual date and pull the name of the month. And so right here is the month name and the month number side by side. And go back to that date drop-down menu and go to quarter, right? So this is what quarter out of the year are we talking about? So this will be standard year quarter, for example. And go back to that actual date and pull out, again, things like what week out of the year are we talking about, or what day of the week are we talking about? Any of that information that's relevant to us. Now, what happens when we say, actually, my fiscal year starts on, let's call it July 1, right? So Q1 is actually July, August, and September. Q2 is October, November, December, etc. Well, in that situation, what we can do is we can say that if the quarter, excuse me, if the month is the 7th, 8th, or 9th, that the quarter is Q1. And if it's the 10th, 11th, and 12th, then it's Q2, etc. So one of the things that I didn't get into yet, but if you are excited about Power Query, you should absolutely dive into, is the idea of M functions. Power Query uses the language called M to create custom columns. So if I'm interested in the quarter of the year, I think the easiest way to do this is if it's as easy as, well, Q1 is actually my Q3, Q2 is actually my Q4, etc., right? So what I'll do here is I'll go to Add Column, add a custom column, and what I'll do is I'll say this is the fiscal year quarter, right? And I'll say if, and this is how M is written here, everybody. You write in a function like the if statement, for example, and you say if Let's actually go in a little closer. Let's see, we need the standard year quarter is greater than 2. Then take the, oh, excuse me, if it's less than 3. If it's less than 3, then take the standard year quarter and subtract, or excuse me, add 2. Sorry about that. So all I was trying to do there, everybody, is if it's less than 3, that means it's either 1 or 2. And if the first quarter is actually the third quarter, and if the fourth quarter is actually the second quarter is actually the fourth quarter, then you can do this. Else, if standard year quarter is, else, what am I doing here? Else standard year quarter minus 2. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. So if it's greater than 3, then it's plus 2. If it's less than 3, then it's minus 2. Okay, good. I was trying to do that on the fly. Sorry about that. So I hit OK. And now I have what quarter of the year I'm talking about, right? What year of the fiscal, what quarter of the fiscal year I'm talking about. So I can call this a number value, like so. And of course, I can also do things like add quarter or Q to the front of this. So what I'll do here in order to make that happen is use this really nice function called column from examples. So I go to column from examples, and I'm just going to do Q1, and then right down here, and then right up here it says, do you mean Q and then the month number? No, that's not actually what I mean. So I'll come down here. I'll call this Q1. Okay, so then right there, you see it's creating a little calculation. Take a Q and put it onto the standard year quarter. Actually, that's what I've been doing, isn't it? Sorry about that. So let me zoom out here so you can see it a little bit better. So I'm doing fiscal year quarter, column from examples, and we're talking about Q3. There we go. So Q and then the text from the fiscal year quarter. Hit OK. And so now I have FYQ, for example, might be the name of that column. Okay. So what I'm doing here is illustrating that Power Query can do more than just what you would expect of the cleanup and stuff. It can generate things that are useful to you, like what week of the year are we talking about? Is it the past or the future, or what fiscal quarter is it, or anything along those lines? So you say to me, oh, Neil, our fiscal quarter starts on whatever the date is. We just have to figure out what the logic of that is, and then we can come up with the fiscal year quarter. Now this is a table that has the fiscal year quarter to it, so it's going to be very easy for me to apply this in my calculations. So now my Power Query is done. I go to my Home tab and I hit Close and Apply, and those tables that I've been building, the 2018, 2019, the account mapping, and the calendar are all being thrown into the data model. And it's up to Power Pivot to establish what the relationships are and to generate any calculations if I need to. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here to, on the Home tab, you can see this through, where is it? Actually, on the Modeling tab, you can click over here onto Manage Relationships, or you can simply click onto the little table down there. All right, so I'm going to click on the table, and I'm just going to take out all the relationships that auto-generated. I'm not sure what these relationships are, so I'm not going to leave them there. So I have the expenses from 2018, I have the expenses from 2019, I have the accounts, and I have the calendar. Looking good. Now the date of the transaction, right here, the expense date, is definitely connected to what the actual dates are. And our expense date from 2019 expenses are also related to the actual date. And then over here, the account is related to the account, and the account is related to the account. So now I have relationships in place. I can go over here to my table icon to see anything else that I want to generate. So I'm going to go to my 2019 expenses, click on that table over here on the right, and I'm now in Power Pivot, apologize, and I'm creating calculations. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to create, let's call it, I'm going to call a measure that has no filters on it. So I'm going to click on New Measure right up here at the top, and I'm going to create a new measure on the 2019 expenses and call this Total 2019 Expenses. Now, why am I doing this? It's because in just a second, I'm going to do the equivalent of a pivot table. And when I do a pivot table, I'm going to be able to create a bunch of charts that show all the different expenses broken down by whatever I want to break them down by. And then as I filter, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to lose track of what the total expense number is because I'm going to filter it down. But Power Pivot allows me to create a calculation right here with this measure that is not filtered. This is what's called the calculate function. Okay. Let me zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. So the calculate function is one of the functions you should absolutely learn in Power Pivot. What it does is it does literally any calculation you want with any filter you want to place on it. So I'm going to say, well, I want a sum, right? So that's a sum function. Everybody's done a sum function, so that's not that big a deal, right? But what is the sum of? Well, the sum is of all the 2019 expenses right here, this thing called subtotal for my 2019 expenses. Close the parentheses. So why do I have a sum of all my 2019 expenses inside a calculate function? It's because of what comes next. You're going to do the sum, and you're going to do it, comma, with the following filter. The filter is all. And I'm going to say literally everything. Don't filter by anything at all, anything in 2019 expenses. So as we see the data filtered down for other purposes, if we are using total 2019 expenses, we will not see that filter affect this calculation. All right, so this is a calculation that is a measure. A measure is important because it doesn't have to be added to the table. You see, why do I need total 2019 expenses on this table? I'm going to need it later in my visualization. But here, I don't need it. And so there's no reason for me to run the calculation now and exert my machine toward that end. So I hit enter, and there will now be a measure called, right over here on the side, called Total 2019 Expenses. You see the little calculator icon that's right there. We're looking good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do some visualizations. Okay. So I go over here to my chart icon over here on the left, and I'm going to take my subtotal column right over here for 2019 expenses and drop that into my spreadsheet, or excuse me, my report. So this is what's called a report in Power BI. You've seen me use it a couple of times now. This is my canvas, right? This is the place where my charts go. And you saw me bring in the subtotal column, boom, onto the page. So our subtotal for all these expenses is under $3 million. And of course, I want to see this broken down by something. So I'm going to go over here to the calendar, and I'm going to show it broken down by the FYQ. You remember making that earlier? I'm going to take the FYQ and drop that onto there, and I can see it broken down by which fiscal quarter we're talking about. And in the exact same opposite direction, I can uncheck the fiscal year quarter and go back to the total chart. And then over here for, let's say, the account, let's see, where are we? I'm going to go to the account type and break it down by services, reimbursements, utilities, etc. All right, so this is a good time for us to pause. The question number 7 is a simple question. I think you can probably tell that this canvas can take a whole bunch of visualizations. If you were to imagine your audience right now, do you think they need 45 charts on the same page? Do you think they need 5? Or do you think maybe you'll keep your reports limited, 1 to 3 different charts? We're going to be able to make potentially as many charts as we want to in Power BI, but it's important that we recognize that the most important thing here is communication. If we're not communicating effectively, then the people we are trying to push this information to are not going to like us a whole lot. So where do you think your audience is in terms of being able to see a ton of information? Good deal. I'm right there with you. So one of the things that, after this session is over, you go to YouTube and you check out Power BI, you're going to see people with 4, 5, 6, 7 charts on their report. Probably not in your best interest. You probably want to keep it a little bit more limited, a little quieter, a little easier for people to process. Okay. Now I have just brought in a column chart. Let's think about this. I'm going to click out. Well, let me show you the interaction here, everybody. So everybody look at my screen right now. Look at the chart that's on my screen. You can see around the edges is a border and then these little framing elements in the corners and the sides. This is the visual indicator that tells you this chart is selected right now. If I click on the report outside of that chart, you see how that frame goes away? So now that chart is not selected. I am not changing that chart. Let me go back and click on it again, and I'm just going to delete this chart really quickly so I can talk more slowly about the building process, okay? So the first thing is that all of your fields and all of your tables that are over here on the right-hand side that were queried by Power Query and then managed by Power Pivot are available to you. And you, of course, have things that were already part of the table, right? So if I go back to that table for the 2019 expenses, let's take a look at the 2019 expenses more slowly this time around. You see there's a department column, the date of the expense, the amount of the account that the expense is connected to, the cost and the quantity, and then if you multiply the cost by the quantity, what the subtotal is. So in Power Query and Power Pivot, we can establish what those columns are. We can bring all of this together. We're feeling pretty good about things. And actually, since I'm taking a beat here, I want to take a moment and bring in the other table. So I'm going to go to my Home tab, get the data from another Excel file. And the last one I want to bring in is the department mapping table. That's the one that I haven't brought in yet. So here's my sheet with all my departments in it. Excuse me. I will name that here in Power Query. I'll name this department mapping and do the same thing we did earlier, which is to remove the top row. And then to use the first row as headers and get rid of any unnecessary columns. And now that it's ready, I can again close and apply. So that table is now part of the data model, but the data model hasn't established that there are any relationships yet. It's possible the Power Pivot is automatically doing that, but what we'll do here now is click on department mapping. We'll put this table over here somewhere and we'll say the department is the department and the department is the department. So I'm establishing relationships between those. All right, so I'm going to go back to the tables. And again, I see my tables for 2019 expenses, for 2018 expenses, for my accounts, my departments, and my calendar. And the first thing that I did once I had all those things in place was that I created a calculation as a measure. Now, if you remember, I made that measure on my 2019 expenses. It's called total 2019 expenses, but when I look at the table, I don't see the measure in the actual table. I'm going to do the same thing for 2018 expenses. If I click on the 2018 expenses table, I can click to make a new measure. I can call this one total 2018 expenses is equal to, and remember the calculation that I'm talking about here. This is probably the one that you're going to use most, which is the calculate function. The calculate function's job is to establish what the filter is on the calculation that you want to use. So in the sum function's case, I'm going to take all of the subtotals from 2018, right there, add those up, and with the all function say, please do not filter this table. Okay, no matter what you do, please always show me, oops, I missed the 0 right here, 2018 expenses. Please do not filter down this value called total 2018 expenses. Always show me the total. Okay, and then I hit enter, and that measure is created, but once again, it doesn't get added to the table. It gets added to the data model as something that can be used. So now let's go into the reporting, okay? And we're going to do a chart with our 2018 expenses. And I'm just going to use the subtotal calculation right here, drag that onto the page. Now, when I drag it onto the page, the default chart that it uses is a column chart, but as you can see over here on the right, there are lots of other visualizations at our disposal. So, you know, you could definitely see yourself using pie charts or line charts or area charts, things like that. So let's say that we want to break down our expenses by time. So what we'll do is we'll make ourselves a line chart. So we're going to click on the subtotal right here. And remember, if the chart is selected, now watch over here. I just click on a different visualization like the line chart, and it says, well, you haven't given me anything to draw a line about. So this is just a single value. So what do I want to show this by? I'd like to show this, and you see over here, axis, legend, and then tooltips and things like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the expense date and drag that into the axis field. And now I see a line chart for all the expenses over time, like this, for all of 2018. So you can see January of 2018 through the end of the year. I can see the spikes in expenses, etc. I can then convert it back into a bar chart if I want to, like so. So there's my expenses as a column chart. And if I want to, I can make it into a stacked column chart. Now, how would the stack work? Well, let's show it by what department we're talking about. Let's take department and drag it into the legend and let go. And there you can see we have a stacked set of columns with all the departments broken down. Okay, so you can use the information that's inside of this one table to do your calculations and your visualization. And you can use the information that is there natively as a value that's already in the table. But you can also do this connected, right? So I can do subtotal. I can do this as a column chart, and I can break this down by one of the things that I have mapped this to. So I'm going to break it down by division. Let's see here. Pretty sure. Let's do this subtotal and this division. No, it still doesn't. All right, must not have mapped it correctly. Let me make sure that my department is in there. So department and department. All right, I'm not going to bother with it too much. So instead of department, I'll just use account because I know I've got that. There we go. So we've got account type. Okay. Yeah, it was very colorful, wasn't it? Have that many different departments in there. Okay, so that's looking fine, right? Or think about it this way. We have account type as the axis value. We could take account type and make it the legend value like that. And then we could take something like department and make it into the axis value. So here is departments 1 through 12 broken down by the type of account that we're interested in. So I'm going to take that information out, drag that information in there. And then watch what happens when I click outside the chart. When I click outside the chart, all of a sudden, none of the fields that I was just interacting with is active anymore. And this means that I can make a new chart, right? If I am on this chart, if I'm selected on this chart, everything I do is changing the chart that's right in front of you. But if I click outside the chart, now I'm making a new chart, okay? So here, I might do a chart like this, and then click outside of it, and then bring in the, I'm not sure, those were 2019? Yeah, that was 2019. So let me pull this over to the side. This will be 2019's data, and then I'll bring in 2018's data, right? So subtotal in a chart broken down by the type of account, like so. Drag it into place, stretch it out, whatever I feel like doing. Okay, so I can use multiple charts in here anytime I want to, and I can also use the measures. So earlier I made measures called total 2018 expenses and total 2019 expenses. So watch what happens when I do this. I'm going to click on the checkbox for total 2018 expenses, and it's going to drop that in there as a bar chart. But over here on the right, I'm actually going to choose the option for a card. So where is my card? There it is. You'll see that the card icon is a little 1, 2, 3 on a card right here. So right here, if I click on, let me click back on it, so I'm editing it. If I click on the card, it shows that the total 2018 expenses is $3 million, okay? I'll pull that over here, and then maybe I'll do the same thing for 2019. Here's 2019's value coming in, and I switch it over to a card. Okay. So I can now line these things up with one another. Can resize it so they're the same basic size and shape as one another, etc. Now, I want you to watch this next part. I am going to, you know what I'll do? I'll break it down by quarter. Okay, so over here on the right, and again, notice I have all of these visualizations deselected currently. Now, why is that important? It's important because now when I click on fiscal year quarter and I bring that in, you see it brings it in as a table, but another thing that I could bring this in as is what's called a slicer, which for those of you comfortable with pivot tables in Excel, the modern version of Excel, a slicer is your filter. All right, so I can come in here and now have a filter based on which quarter of the year I'm interested in. So I can say Q2 is what I'm interested in, or Q3 is what I'm interested in. And you see the two charts up above change? But you see what isn't changing? Does everybody see that? The numbers on the left are not changing because, remember what I did? I made a measure that was a calculation that said, never filter this thing. Right? It said sum it up and show all the values at all times. Never, ever, ever filter this value. So these are the reasons why you might need these more advanced measures that are available to you in Power Pivot, even if you're using pivot tables in Microsoft Excel, because sometimes you think to yourself, I really just need this number all the time. And so being able to have a filtered number can be very helpful. Let's see. Exactly. Yeah, Chris is pointing out the fact that the idea here is this is slick, it's dynamic, it's easy to show how I can show the 2018 versus 2019 side by side, how I can show different filters on the fly. All of that stuff is really nice, and it makes a little bit of a wow factor during a meeting when you feel like people need to sit up and pay attention. Yeah. The other really interesting thing about this filter is this. If you click on the services, you'll see that it filters both charts by services. Does everybody see that? Let me go back in here and make one more chart. I am going to show the 2019 expenses over here, and I'm going to do this as a pie chart. And I'm going to show that pie broken down by department like so, okay? Now watch as I click on the services up here, and it shows me, you see that right there? You see how clicking on services to filter by this value gives me this chart down here? So this live filtering of one chart by clicking on another chart is a really interesting and dynamic way to present information. So this is a good place for me to have Chris throw up the second to last question of the day. Which is, do you see different situations for different levels of filtering? And what I'm going to show you next is how to bookmark this so that you can say, here is this level of filtering, here is that level of filtering. Are you in those types of situations where you feel like you need that dynamic filtering on the fly? Or is this something that just looks a little flashy and like, whoa, look at that thing? And Robin's going the opposite direction with this. And I want to really call this out because I think you should probably be able to tell from the way I'm teaching this session that I think almost everybody should focus on Power Query and Power Pivot. The Power Query and Power Pivot are the core. They're the thing that says when we are bringing in data that is obnoxious, that is too big, the data is messed up, you know, all over the place, that's where you really need the help, right? You need the help when there's millions of rows of data. You need the help when you need to clean up something that's really terrible. And then when it's time to, yeah, man, you could really make some flashy, cool looking stuff in Power BI, right? So the visualization component of it, this is what's called Power View. If you remember from earlier in the presentation, we have Power Query, which is good for combining and cleaning up the data. Power Pivot, which is good for modeling the data, the relationships, and any calculations you need. And then you have Power View, which is the tool that we use so that we can visualize things in this kind of fancy and flashy way. And just so everybody's completely comfortable here, if I were to take the subtotal values from 2018 and 2019 and drop them onto the page and make those into cards as well, right? So this is the $1 million that's filtered to just be the services in 2019. And here's the subtotal for 2018 as a card once again. And there it is. There's the subtotal. And then if I click here to get rid of the filter, there you can see 3 million all around the board. You can see all these filters have gone away. Clicking on reimbursements shows me a filtered result in these two cards and shows me a filtered result in the pie chart as well as the two column charts. Clicking on it again brings all the data back again. And clicking on something like Q3 and clicking on something like utilities shows you different subsets of the information. It's very flashy. Okay. So let me go ahead and zoom out here for a second. Actually, no, before I do, apologize. The last thing that I was going to show you about the visualizations, let's look around and see what we have at our disposal. Up here on the Insert tab, we have the ability to add more pages. So one of the really interesting things about Power BI is that you can have multiple pages of visualizations about different aspects of the data. So you can see the little plus sign down here at the bottom. You've got now page 1 and page 2, and you can rename these. So you can call page 1 the overview, and you can call page 2 the subset of the data, and decide to bring in different charts on this page from the first page. And then when we have our visuals, you have tons and tons of different types of charts that we can add. And we haven't really gone through a ton of them over here, but let's just take a second and look. I think everybody recognizes bars and columns and lines and areas from Excel at some point or another. We also have this really nice thing called a ribbon chart. I believe it's also called a Sankey chart, where you can see where something changed or where it started from and where it went to, those sorts of things. Bubble charts and pie charts. The card idea, they call this the big number, right? So big numbers can often be useful. And if you have data like your like zip codes and things like that, you can have filled maps or even globe type maps in your data sets. Now, I can also use some of the newer newer chart types. So for example, here, I'll go over here to 2019 expenses, whoops, not the total, grab the subtotal here, drag that in, and then break that down into a tree map chart by the type of account that we're talking about. So the account types, that creates different size blocks in here, which is nice. And you've now already seen that we can click on one of the blocks to filter by that block, and we can filter by the slicer as well. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to filter it and create bookmarks for those filters. Oh, Jennifer's asking an important question here. How do you end up sharing this? So there are multiple different ways. I would say that probably the most common way is to bring this up live during a meeting and interact with it. And the second most common way is to go to File up here in the top and to export this and send it out to reports or copy and paste this into into a PowerPoint presentation, things like that. Okay. And yes, you can actually use this together with Teams. In Microsoft Teams, you can create a tab that is your Power BI report, right? So what you do is once you've created your report, you then click on Publish right here, and you publish this, you save all your changes, call mine awesome report, right? Okay, so here's my report. I have built this thing, and where do I want to publish it to? You see right here is my Power BI workspace. I click on select right there, and I can push this up into Power BI online. So while that's doing it, you can see right here that if I open up Office 365, I have this Power BI link right here, and that here is my workspace over here on the left. My data set's ready. Great. And here's my report called the Awesome Report. Hey. And you should be able to see that all the charts that I had in Power BI Desktop are now available to us online. So I can pull this up from any computer I go to by logging in to Office 365 or into my Power BI account if I don't have a 365 account. And then for those of you who are getting into Microsoft Teams, something that's really interesting is that if you want to keep this dashboard up and running inside of your team, you can go to any team right in here. Let's say I'm on Project Kenai here, for example. I go to a channel within a team, hit the little plus sign right up here, and you see right there, Power BI is a tab that I can add to my team channel. So I click on Power BI and it goes through all the different options, right? My workspaces that are out there. You see my awesome report is right there. And when I click on save, then my Power BI report is published to this tab inside of my channel in Microsoft Teams. So there's a lot there, right? You could just bring your laptop, pop this open and just click through it live there in the room. You could send people the link to your Power BI report that's been published online. And you can even take that published report from the different channels in a team, for example, or a page in your SharePoint site and embed that directly in there. Exactly, and Jennifer's pointing out right there, then how about the filtering? right? So then the filtering comes into play where you're going to be able to create different pre-filtered setups, right? So this is where our ability to bookmark things comes into play. When I go up to insert up at the top of the screen up here, and I go in and add a, let's see here, no, sorry, it's under view. When I go to bookmarks right there, a bookmark is a place where a filter has been added. So then I just go in here and I say, well, sometimes I want you to be able to see Q1 and Q2, right? Something like that. And right over here, I click on add for bookmarks and I rename that bookmark to fiscal year H1 results or something like that. Now I have a bookmark people can go to that's just the first half. And then when I clear the filter, like that, I can create a bookmark to rename all results. And then I can go to Q3 and Q4 and add a bookmark and call that one fiscal year H2 results. Okay. So you can have all results, first half and second half, whatever you feel like doing. You create bookmarks that people can follow to different aspects of your data, and it makes it very, very user-friendly. Okay, we are just up against the time. So what I'd like to do is round this out for everybody and put it sort of firmly in their head, okay? When we talk about Power BI, we are talking about a tool that does the following things. Number one, it connects in a live way to basically any data source you can imagine. A database, that's an obvious one. You got all kinds of databases reporting to you and you can connect to them. That's great. The reports that are spit out in Excel format or CSV format or text format or PDF format for that matter, you can query those things. And if you're the type of business where people are loading a bunch of reports into SharePoint, you can query an entire folder in a SharePoint site. You can query basically anything you want. That's step one. Step two, you then have the power tools necessary to really mess with that data, right? You saw some transformations I was doing with filling, with handling dates, and all sorts of interesting stuff. I'm just going to tell you right now, Power Query is the single best thing that was added to Excel in the last 25 years. Hands down. There is no doubt in my mind that every single human who uses Excel for more than an hour a week should teach themselves Power Query because it allows them to do tons and tons of that hard work. Then next, Power Pivot. Power Pivot allows you to establish relationships and create calculations that don't add any complication. And this whole thing allows Power BI to hit millions and millions of rows of data. Power BI can access something up to 10 gigabytes in size with millions and millions of rows of data. So that power and that ability to basically replace all those VLOOKUPs that are grinding your spreadsheet down is another very powerful component. And then finally, what you see right here, after we create the calculations from it, then we can put those calculations into column charts, pie charts, big numbers, tree map charts, any kind of chart you can imagine, and filter it by a slicer, filter it by clicking on different parts of the chart, filtering it by pre-selecting your filter settings and saving them as bookmarks, and then take that whole thing and push it online to publish it so that people can access it and can interact with it in a wide range of different ways. Fantastic. So everybody, now we're going to go a bit bigger picture with the ETL portion of things, and then we'll get to that last question that we poll question that we didn't get to before the session break. So let me just now demonstrate that the depreciation spreadsheet that I'm going to point at next is a CSV file and has multiple problems in it. Okay, so this is the file that that we're going to deal with in just a moment. And I just want to take a moment here, and I want you to imagine that you are in Excel again and trying to solve this problem. Notice that the acquisition date column is messed up. The reason it's messed up is because the system that spit out the information is spitting out the dates in day, month, year format instead of month, day, year format. So Excel is not handling that very well. Also, the ID number column, that farthest left column, there are actually a bunch of leading zeros on that column, and we would love to keep the leading zeros there. Now, I know you probably have solutions for those, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to demonstrate that Power Query is better than those solutions. So everybody, watch my screen on this one. We're going to hit now in Power Query. Within Power BI, we're going to hit a CSV file. Right, so we go to new source, and this time around it's a text or CSV file instead of spreadsheet from earlier, and we go to the inventory depreciation spreadsheet. Cool, so we bring this up. It says, this is what I see so far. I hit OK, and we're pulling that into Power Query, and now we see the two problems. The first problem is that the ID number is being treated as a number. You see the little 1, 2, 3 that's in the corner right there? So how do we fix this? We click on the 1, 2, 3 right there, and we say, actually, this column is text when it comes in. Click on replace current, and just like this, you see that? All the leading zeros that you were expecting stay on there automatically. Next column over, the acquisition date column. Okay, so the automated system spit it out as day, month, year, or some other random format that we don't like. How do we solve that problem? Well, we click on the ABC, but we don't go to date. Okay, if I had just gone to date, it would still look at this date in my format, my American date format, and Power Query wouldn't have liked that. But right down here, I have the option of choosing a different locale. You see that? By choosing a different locale, I can say, actually, places like the UK handle dates in this way, so this is what this system is spitting out to me. So I'm going to click on using locale right here. And right down here, it's going to ask me the question. There we go. What type of data is it? Oh yeah, it is a date, but it's a date as if my client was from the United Kingdom, for example. And you could choose any locale that you think the date would be identified with. So I can click here, United Kingdom as the locale, and hit OK, and instantly all of those dates get magically handled the right way. How's that work for everybody? Yeah, that type of thing, these types of cleanups are only possible if we use Power Query. It's just not possible in a standard spreadsheet. All right, so now the last exercise of Power Query specifically is, why do they call it Power Query? The reason that they call it Power Query is because when you try to get the data to come into, once again, either Excel or Power BI, either way, instead of doing what you would do in Excel, which is to open the CSV file and just have it open, or maybe go to a website and copy the information and paste it into the spreadsheet, where it's just there in the spreadsheet. Instead, this is a query. It is something that goes out and looks for the data and then pulls the data in and handles it as it's doing the pulling process, right? So as it's pulling the data in from the CSV file, it's handling the dates and the numbers and stuff like that. It means that anytime you want to, you can refresh the query and see if the numbers have changed. The query will just rerun. But it also means that if you are querying one set of data, let's say the 2018 numbers, and then you want to do the exact same query on the 2019 numbers, you can do it in an instant. So that's the example I'm going to give you right here, everybody. So once again, here I am in my folder structure. And if I look not at the O1 cleanup folder, but the O2 adjust folder. So you can see here are reports for January, February, March, and April. Okay. Now, it's possible you may want to roll these up. We'll get to that later on in this workshop. But here, I'm going to tell you that what I think is I should be able to query the January stuff, then apply the exact same query to February, apply the exact same query to March, apply the exact same query to April. So watch how I would do something like that. Okay, so first things first, we're back inside of Power BI. We're back inside the Power Query Editor, and it's time to get data from a new source. Again, these are Excel files. So I go to Excel, and I go to the O2 folder, which is the adjust folder, and I say, yeah, let's query January's data. All right, so the January data is coming in. Here's the data from sheet 1 right here, and I'll hit OK. Okay, so here is the sales report Jan 2019. Looking good. Let me give you one example of a cool thing that we can do with this. Right over here with the sale date column, I click on the sale date column and I decide that I need to know things about this date, like what quarter it's in, what week it's in, what day of the week it's on, what have you. Right up here at the top of the screen, I can click on Add Column, and I can use different date calculations to add a new column. So what I'll do here is go to Day and choose which name of the day is each one of these dates. So I'll click on that, and just like that, I have a day name column. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? So I come over here and I call this day of week. Or let's say that I go over here to the sale date column, and I come in here and I say, oh, I want to know what week out of the year it is. Just like so. Okay. So I am querying this data from January, and I'm doing stuff to it. Now the question becomes, can I do the exact same thing to February? Absolutely. What you'll notice is right over here on the right, this applied steps, the ability to go to the source, and you see the little gear that's right over here? I click on that gear and I can change the source to something else. So I can click on Browse and say, now query February, and hit OK. And just like that, you see here I've changed the source, and now I go to the end and it says here's all the data from February, and you can see all those February dates are in there. It's got all the new information, and it's still telling us what day of the week, what week of the year, etc. Okay. All right, there was a question coming in. Let me check with this. Very good question. So Stacy's asking an important question. Let me go ahead and say that I'm answering that live. There we go. Stacy's asking a question of fiscal quarters versus quarters of the year. Now, the main idea is that the drop-down menu that you see right there allows you to figure out quarter of the year. So January, February, March for first quarter, April, May, June for second quarter, etc. However, and this is very important, as we move forward in the very next exercise, we're going to start looking things up with both Power Query and Power Pivot. And the benefit of doing that is that we can bring in something like a table of the calendar and determine right there in the calendar what our fiscal dates are. So we could say this is fiscal Q1, and then we can identify it as being Q1. This is fiscal week 1. This is fiscal year 2019. All that other stuff is completely customizable by us. Okay. Now here is the next stage, right? So this became February. Now I'm going to skip over to the problem because I want you to see this, and it's very, very important to me. So this is the February query. I'm going to tell you right now, the March query is just the same, but the April query I set up so that it would have a mistake in it. Everybody ready for that? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the source, click the gear, and query the April data. So here's the April spreadsheet. It comes in, I click OK, and the question that always comes up is, does the data have to be structured the same every month or every quarter or every year, whatever it is? So I'm going to show it to you right here. I have now changed the source. I go to the end, and do you see what happens here? April is structured differently than January, February, and March were. Darn, right? So you see there that there's an error, and it says to you right here, I couldn't find a column called employee name. Would you like to go straight there? Would you like to go to the error? Yes, I would love to go to the error. Thanks so much for helping me out with this, right? So I'm going to click on go to the error. So it's taking me to this step where there's still a problem. So now what I'm going to do is go one step before it. And right here, let's look at the difference. On this step, I look at the data, and then on the next step, it says there's an error and it couldn't find the thing called employee name. So now we look around and we realize, oh, that's the problem. They decided to split the employee name into first name and last name. They thought it would be cleaner that way, but my thing isn't set up for that. Has this ever happened to you? Anybody who works with macros? You have a macro perfectly set up for the way the data comes in, and then the data changes and now your macro is garbage? Watch how fast it is to fix this. I'm going to click on first name, hold down shift, click on last name, and then right here on my transform tab, I have this great tool called merge columns. And that's what's going to do. It's going to allow me to take first name and last name and smash them into an employee name. So I'm going to click on merge columns. I'm going to say, yes, take those two, insert a step right there, and make a column with a space in between called employee name. And now just like that, I have an employee name column. And should that fix the entire rest of the process? Absolutely it should. I can click right through the rest of it. There are no more errors at any point in the process. So I can automate the reuse of any query on any new set of data I want. And the real benefit is that automation is very flexible and easy to maintain. So this is where the poll question was supposed to come up. Sorry about that, Chris. Go ahead and pop that up. The poll question is, do you see yourself using Power Query more for just a simple problem solving, like, hey, here's a big ugly thing, and it would normally take me a long time to fix this data up? Or do you have a lot of those things where the same report comes in every week or every month or every quarter, and you want to reapply it over and over and over again, and you want to be very sure that 27 months from now, when the database developer decides to change the columns up, that your query still works and that Power BI still does all the things it's supposed to do, or about 50-50 between the two of them. Right, so Power Query solves tons of problems that couldn't be solved by normal Excel features, and it allows you to automate the process, making it simple to reapply it over and over and over again. Yeah, about 50-50, but a lot of folks are really excited about just being able to fix a stubborn problem. I'm right there with you. Beautiful. So everybody, that's Power Query. Now that Power Query has done its job, whatever that job is, what we do is we hit close and apply here in Power BI. Remember that when we were in Excel, what we clicked on, let's go back here to Excel real quick. I'm going to get the data from a CSV file. Here we go. I'm going to get the data from that CSV file right there. I'm going to fix it up a little bit, transform the data. And then once the transformation is done, this is text, and this is using a European locale. Come on, there we go. This is a date from the UK. In Excel, the same thing is called close and load. and that drops it into the page in the spreadsheet, okay? So same basic principles, except one is in a spreadsheet, so it loads it to the page in the spreadsheet, and the other one is in Power BI, so now it's being loaded to what's called the data model, okay? Let's see here. Why is it that when you're working on the April sheet, the name of the February worksheet is highlighted? Everybody, let me go back in there. So once again, all I have to, oops, sorry. I leaned on my mic. I think everybody let me know if the audio went crazy on you. Does everybody hear me okay still? What I can do is go back into transforming the data. You see over here on the left, these queries, I can double click and just name this query anything I want. So now it'll be sales April. Okay, so the name of the query over there on the right side, on the left side of the screen, that is purely based on what I decided to name the query. So the fact that I decided to name it January and then later name it February was just a, you know, just a choice that I was making there, and I would have to keep up with that. Okay. All right, another question that came in. What happens if the last name appears, Mary? I'm not sure what that question means exactly. Basically, the gist of this is that the original data had a column called employee name. Then as Power Query was doing its job in January, and then later in February, then March, it was always employee name. Then in April, it became first name and last name. So what we did was, because the query wasn't doing its job successfully anymore, we took the two queries and we mashed them together into employee name. There are lots of ways we could solve that problem. The main point of that exercise is the following. If you had written a macro to clean that data up, if you had used VBA to clean that data up, would it have been as easy to fix the code when it went from employee name to first name and last name? Almost certainly not. It would have been a headache to fix that step of the problem. With Power Query, it was very easy to find where the issue was and fix it just like that. All right. So again, everybody, glad everybody is on the same page with me here. Next question up is, why are we interested in the next stage of the process, something called Power Pivot? So Power Query is fantastic for cleaning up data, combining it, doing different things like that. The next thing that we're going to do is deal with Power Pivot, which is also known as the data model. For those of you who've been working in Excel recently, if you've ever made a pivot table and noticed there's a new checkbox that says add this to the data model, that is Power Pivot. So what does Power Pivot do? It does two main things, and really the biggie for most people, I think, is going to be the relationships. So anybody who's done database work knows about relationships. You have a table of data, let's say it's all of your employees. And the employee data has things like, what's the employee ID number? What department do they belong to? Things like that. Now, the next part of it is that you shouldn't include all the information about that employee's department in the employee table. Because what that does is it reproduces the same information over and over again and makes it more likely that you're going to have issues. So in a database, what you do is you say, I have a table full of all my employees, and I have a table full of all my departments. And an employee belongs to a department. There is a relationship between those two things. So when you follow that relationship, you can say, show me all the employees from this department, or show me all the employees who fall under this characterization. What's great about this is that Power Pivot allows us to do the equivalent of a VLOOKUP, except with no VLOOKUP. Let me demonstrate here for you. So I am going to pull up some data that is related. Okay. So right here, if you notice, I have a spreadsheet called my long data set that has 17 megs worth of data in it. And what you'll notice is that in this data set with all of my different products, I have a company ID column. Now, this company ID should tell me more about the company, right? Should tell me what country that company is in or any of a number of other things. And you would normally think of using VLOOKUP to combine this together with something else. Now, what's interesting here is in the way that I set this up, I have this master database file right here that has my, come on, there it is, all of my countries and, excuse me, all of my companies and the countries that they're in and the currency that they use. So if I wanted to filter this by all the countries that work in the US, or if I want to filter this by all the ones that use the British pound or things like that, then the question becomes, do I need VLOOKUP to accomplish that goal? Okay. Well, when VLOOKUP happens, let's just take a second here. Just an FYI, this long data set has 216,000 rows of data in it. So if I wanted to query, let's say 5 or 6 pieces of information, that would be over 1 million VLOOKUPs. Has anybody here ever had over 1 million VLOOKUPs running in a spreadsheet before? How long does it take for 1 million VLOOKUPs to calculate, would you say? I actually did this test on my machine last week sometime, and it comes out to about a minute per million VLOOKUPs. So if you have 4 million VLOOKUPs, it takes about 4 minutes for all those VLOOKUPs to calculate. And the odds are very good your machine's going to crash at some point or another, right? So watch what Power Pivot does that is different from how VLOOKUP would work. Now, first of all, if you notice right now, I have my Power Pivot tab in Excel. If you want to use Power Pivot, all the same Power Pivot features that we're about to talk about in Excel, you are going to need the Power Pivot tab turned on, and that is done through the File tab up in the top left-hand corner, going down to Options, File to Options, and you go over here to Add-ins. Okay, so File, Options, Add-ins, and in your, I believe it's your COM add-ins that has Power Pivot in it. So you notice right down here, I can go to my COM add-ins and there is the Power Pivot plugin. So that's why I have a Power Pivot tab in Excel. If you have the same plugin turned on, then you will also have Power Pivot available to you. Okay, so before we do this in Power BI, I want to show it on a small scale so you can see the benefits. Okay, everybody watch my screen very carefully here. I'm going to say that I have a salesperson ID. Actually, no, let's do employee ID. Let's do employee salary. And let's do employee department. Okay, so this is my little table over here for who my employees are, how much they make, and what department they belong to. Now, I'm going to come over here. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do manager. Now over here, I'm going to say who's the manager and what department is that manager in. Okay, so I'll do employee ID 1 through something. Okay, so there's 32 employees. Who all make a salary and who all have a manager. Okay, so the managers are 1, 3, 5, and 7, and the departments are HR, IT, Ops, and Ops. Okay, So I hope what you can see here in the way that I've got this set up is that I would want potentially to do a pivot table where I analyze the salary broken down by which manager we were talking about, but I might also want it broken down by what department I want to talk about. So in Excel, here's how this works, everybody. I click on the data over here on the left, and I turn it into a table. Now, if it's a table like this, and this data over here on the right is also a table like this, now when I decide to turn this into a pivot table, let's look for the question I was talking about a second ago. I'll click up here on Summarize with the pivot table, and you see this checkbox right down here. Does everybody see that? This is what I'm going for. Do I want to add this to the quote unquote data model? So Microsoft is of course famous for not calling the same thing the same name everywhere. When you see data model, mentally, I want you to say that is the same thing as Power Pivot, okay? So what is the data model for this spreadsheet? Watch this. I'm going to click on Add it to the data model and hit OK. And now when I make this pivot table, see this pivot table right here, I want you to look over on the right side of the screen with me. Do you see that right now it says we can use the employee ID, the employee salary, and the manager. I'm going to go ahead and check the check boxes for the salary, put the manager over here. So here is the total salary broken down by which manager you report to. Okay, so I can see the manager reports feeding up to manager number 1, 3, 5, or 7. But what if I wanted to filter this by what department they worked in? Well, I know that I have the manager in another table with what department they work in. So I can come over here to the right and click on all, and I can say, hey, let's look at that other table that has the department in it. See that right there? So this, the fact that there should be, whoops, sorry about that. The fact that there should be a relationship between table 1 and table 2, between the table that has the managers and the departments in it and the table that has the employees in it, this is Power Pivot. It's establishing relationships. Now, if I go over to this table and I say, yes, I actually do want to break this down by what department they work in, right? So I'm going to come down here and drop it there. The problem that you're going to see, you see this yellow box right here and it says the relationships may be needed. This is where we need to use Power Pivot. We click on Create, and right here inside of Excel, we can say, hey, you know the table called Table 1? It's got something called a manager column. And you know the table called Table 2? It also has a column called manager. The manager from table 1 is the same from manager from table 2. There is a relationship between those two tables. And so now when I hit OK, you can clearly see that I have 2 managers in ops, 1 manager in IT, and 1 manager in HR. There is a relationship between those 2 tables. And if you think about it, let's all consider the options here. What I normally would have done to make this pivot table is say, I'm going to need to use VLOOKUP to go get the department for each of the managers. But I didn't have to do that. Power Pivot is replacing my need for VLOOKUPs. Now, I want to show you that, but on a much, much, much larger scale when we talk about those records and the database. So I'm going to close the database file that I have open. I'm going to need to query that, all right? And I'm going to query the spreadsheet as well. Stacy's asking an important question. Everybody, yes, you can absolutely use tables that are in different tabs, different spreadsheets. You're going to see in my example that the two tables, one of them is in a spreadsheet, the other one's in a database. That's where I want your brain to go with this. It's not just that you can be in different files, but literally one of them can be on a website and the other one can be in an Excel file and another one could be in a database. They can be anywhere at all, and there can be relationships between these. So let's see this in action with my database and my spreadsheet, everybody. Once again, I'm going to query the two data sources. I'm going to click on Get Data from the Excel file first. Okay, so I'll go over here to my desktop, look at my Power BI files. So these are ones that I created for bigger picture. I knew I didn't want to mail everybody 17 megabytes worth of files, so everybody stick with me on this. I'm going to click on my long data set here and query that gigantic 216,000 row table. Okay, so here is my 216,000 row table. I'm going to click on Transform Data, and that opens it up in Power Query. Looking good. So I'm going to call this one, this is all depreciation. So this is a depreciation table across multiple companies, all falling under the same umbrella. Okay. And then secondly, I'm going to go to New Source, and I'm going to query an Access database this time around. While I'm waiting for that to load. Gotcha. And I'm going to query my Access database right there and click on Connect. Okay, so there's my database right there. I query this table. Shoot. I'm sorry, everybody. Looks like I'm going to need to do this against the spreadsheet. Sorry about that. Let me click cancel right there. While I'm hitting the other data source right here, let's go ahead and pop up the next question, which is, what's been the maximum number of records that you have had to deal with? You just saw me do a VLOOKUP basically with Power Pivot, and I've been talking here about replacing hundreds of thousands of rows. So what's been your maximum number of records in a table so far? Have you hit 1 million yet? Who knows? What do we got? Okay. Just so that everybody's aware of what's happening right now, when I tried to hit that Access database, this is a brand new install of Power BI on this machine, and I just hadn't hit an Access database before. There's a plugin that I just need to install, and it'll be able to hit the Access database with no problem there. All right, so a lot of people still under 10,000 records. Fantastic, good for you guys. There are a few people up in the 100, 200, 300, 400,000, over 1 million range. And for those of you, yeah, this is a big reason why you need this. Exactly right. All right, good deal. So I have two queries, one query to the depreciation table, one query to the master table. I want to show you two things you can do. Okay, let's do Power Query first. If you feel like you need to be able to bring in, based on the company ID, let's say the country that that company is working in, okay? You can do that. Power Query allows you to do what's called merging queries. But the only reason you would merge queries is if you actually needed the data to exist in this table. So when I click on Merge Queries up here at the top, this is the same thing as VLOOKUP. It's bringing the data in. So I'm going to click here on my company ID column. I'm going to click here on my company table and say there's my company ID. Now, the first thing I want everybody to watch, does everybody see what's happening right down here at the bottom? VLOOKUP has never done this for you. VLOOKUP is being bad to you. They're being mean. Has VLOOKUP ever told you, hey, guess what? I found 216,127 matches for all 216,127 rows of the table? No, you have to do a VLOOKUP and then go looking to see if there were any problems. Power Query right here joins the data in from that other table and tells you whether everything's going smoothly or not. Not bad, right? Oh, shoot. Let me go back there and do that again real quick. Here we go. So here's my company master. Here's my company ID, company ID. It figures out whether there are matches or not, and then you hit OK. And then what you can do is VLOOKUP is basically this. You come in here and say, I want to know what country that's from. See that checkbox right there. And then I hit OK. And so that has brought in 216,127 countries into the data table. Not bad, right? I'm going to hit close and apply. But what I'm telling you is you only do that if the data has to be part of your table. If it can just be related, then we can use Power Pivot instead. Okay, so it just loaded up 17 megs worth of an Excel file, as well as information from a database. And now watch this, everybody. This is Power Pivot. See right over here on the left, there's a teeny tiny little icon right over here with the little tables on it. This is how we establish relationships. So what we're going to do is we are going to come over here. We have our tables that we just brought in. Oh, you see this? It actually already made the relationship for us. I'm going to go ahead and right click on that relationship and delete it so we can make it. Okay. So here's my depreciation table. Here's my company table. And I just need to say that the company name from the depreciation table is the same as the company name in the company master table. There is a relationship between the companies in those two tables. Okay. So that is Power Pivot, everybody. Power Pivot now allows me, let me go ahead and visualize it for you. I'm going to go over here to my charting. I'm going to make from the depreciation table, I'm going to do year-to-date depreciation, like so. That's going to bring in all those numbers, and then watch this, everybody. I'm going to come over here to the companies, and I'm going to say break it down by what let's say the 2-character country code is, just like so. And there it is. That's 216,000 records, 17 megs worth of information that's being processed in absolute seconds. Okay, so here's what I want you to be able to answer for me. Go ahead and Chris and pop open the next question, which is, in your scenario for VLOOKUP, do you think that you actually need to bring in the data more? Or do you just need to have two tables where you say those two tables are related to one another so that you can break it down like this? You don't have to bring the data in unless the data actually has to be part of your table. So do you feel like you're more of a merge person in Power Query, more of a relationship person in Power Pivot, or do you see plenty of situations where you need one or the other, vice versa? Yeah, are you more of a merging person or a relationship person? That's a weird question. All right. So while Power Query brings the data in, massages it, gets it ready, Power Pivot, the first thing that it does is it establishes that there are relationships between tables, that the companies listed in this table are the same as the companies listed in this table. So you can easily do filtering and things like that of one table based on another one. Okay. But there is also another thing that Power Pivot does really nicely. And let me just pull the slide back up so you can all remember what I was talking about earlier. So the first thing we just talked about is that Power Pivot allows you to establish relationships between tables. The second thing is that Power Pivot allows us to create calculations. That's that little f of x on the right-hand side there. It's just, any calculation you've ever done, a sum function, a count function, etc. That's what Power Pivot's good for. The Power Pivot does more interesting calculations than Excel can do because, excuse me, let me start that over again. And I apologize. More interesting is such a weird thing to say, and it's not really accurate. What's accurate is this. Think about the last time you used a pivot table, the last time you summarized information. When you're summarizing information, generally speaking, what you need to do is you need to know things like counts and totals, and you need to know that broken down by different filters. Those are really the most important things that are out there. So when you're trying to do something like that, when you're trying to say, hey, I would like to know the total expenses broken down by every department, or I'd like to know the total number of employees by every department, or things like that. Those are the types of things that Power Pivot handles very nicely. It does what's called either a measure or a calculated column. So let me go through that main idea here, which is what is a measure? What is a calculated column? Because I think everybody understands we're talking about calculations, right? So we're talking about counts and sums and stuff like that. So sure, we need to add stuff up. Got it. What's special about Power Pivot's adding things up? And what's the difference between these two concepts, the measure concept and the calculated column concept? So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to use Power BI to query. So if you notice, so far today, we have queried, let me go back up to the Home tab up here at the top of the screen. So here's the things we've done. We've gotten the data from some outside sources and transformed it. If you ever want to go back into Power Query, you can always click on this button up at the top for transforming the data, right there. And what that does is it takes you back to the area where all your queries are. So we come up here, we click on transform data, and over here on the left, and this was the question that came in a couple of minutes ago, everybody. If you look over there on the left at all of those different queries, I can name those queries anything I want to name them. So always feel totally comfortable in renaming your queries so that they mean something to you. You can see there TBL Company Master is probably not the right way to name that. Probably want to call that like all companies under the umbrella, or whatever you want to call it. So you just double click on that and rename it. So you're querying all this stuff. And one of the things that I think a lot of people get excited about in Power Query is let's really look at the sources that are available to us. I'll go to the new source drop-down menu, go to more right here. And you'll notice in here, I can query the following things. I can query an Excel file or a CSV file or an Access database or a SQL Server database. All those are just fine. Look at the weird stuff that I can query. I can query all the things that are in a folder in SharePoint. I can query a PDF. If I get something from one of my clients that's just a PDF file, I could still query it just like it was a spreadsheet. How many times, let's be honest, have you been in a situation where you're like, oh, the only thing I have is this stupid PDF file? I guess I have to type what's in the PDF file into my spreadsheet. You could just query it straight from here. And then right down here, I also have the ability to query a website. And notice there's tons and tons and tons of different options in here. But I'm going to go over here and grab a website. Let's see, where's my website? Should just be, should be here on other. Oh, there it is. Okay. I don't know how I skipped past that. Okay, so on other, there's my website option. I'm going to click on connect and I'll just show you right here. If I went to a website like xrates.com for exchange rates, and I go over here and grab a data table, right? I just take this website, just copy that URL. I want you to see how easy this is. Paste it right here into this box and hit OK. I was working with another client, they were looking for water data off a website. Click on connect. And it establishes that there is, in fact, a data table of exchange rates with these different currencies. So I hit OK. And again, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to establish that there's a relationship. So here is my depreciation table. I'm going to call this asset depreciation. Here is my table called company master. I'm going to call it all companies. And here's this thing called table 1, which was off of the website. I'm going to double click on this and call it exchange rates. What's really great about this is anytime I refresh it, it's going to get the latest version of those exchange rates. Okay. All right, so now, again, I've got a query to a spreadsheet, to an Access database, and a website. I simply load that into Power BI, and I don't bring the data over. I simply establish that there are relationships between the countries where those companies do business and the exchange rate table, right? So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab my modeling button over here on the left, and I'm going to bring in my exchange rates, right? And then I'm going to say my FX is right here to the US dollar, okay? So now there is a relationship between this table and this one here, so I can bring in the exchange rates if I want to. Now I can go back and I can query, I can bring in the data from that, or I can simply click to filter it by different things. Now, once I'm done with modeling this data in terms of the relationships, the next thing up on the list is to do our calculations. So over here, I have my table icon, and the same place is on the Home tab up here at the top of the screen. If you go over here to your tables, right, your table area. Now, I'm going to click over here on the right on my asset depreciation table, and it brings that table up right here. Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to do a calculation for literally anything I can imagine here. Notice up here on my table tools that I can either create what's called a measure, or I can create what's called a column. Here's the difference between these two things. A measure, well, let's start with a column, excuse me. A new column, pretty much everybody can get because you make new columns in an Excel spreadsheet all the time. A new column is any column that's based on the other columns that are here that is added to my table. So for example, if I click on new column right here, it's going to ask me what the calculation for this column is, right? It's going to ask me what the name of this column is. So I'm going to say that the name of this column is, let's say days in service, okay? Set that equal to, and now the question is, what is the calculation for the number of days in service? Well, I start typing in the in-service date. There we go. And you see this little drop down here? This is one of those places that'll take a little more energy from your side to get figured out. These calculations are what are called DAX calculations. They're not the same as Excel, but they're not that different either. It's kind of a weird middle zone where you're going to have to learn some new terminology. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and hit the tab key and say, yes, what I want you to do is take the in-service date value, right, and say dot date right there. And then I want you to subtract that from today. Okay, so today minus the in-service date. So the today function looks like an Excel function. Asset depreciation in service date dot date, well, that looks a little different, right? And actually, I believe you can do this without the dot date part of things. Well, let's just do it with the dot date part. So I'm subtracting these two things from one another. When I hit enter on my keyboard, it generates a calculation telling me, let's go over there, the number of days in service, and then I can say that that data type is a whole number. Okay, so I have done a calculation in PowerPivot to say how many days this thing has been in service starting from today, right? If you notice right up here at the top of the screen, it's a calculation. This is equal to today minus this other thing, right? You see that the labeling's a little weird, a little different. In asset depreciation in single quotes for the name of the table, in service date in square brackets for the name of the column, and then I've got this whole thing called in service date so that, or excuse me, days in service, excuse me, so the column comes out saying days in service. Okay, so that's how you add another column to this data. The question is, do you need that column in your data? That's a weird question to ask, right? Why wouldn't I need that column in my data? Well, sometimes you don't need that column in your table because it's only useful for charting and stuff like that at the end of the process. So that's why a measure is different. A measure is a calculation just like this one, except it's not being added to the table. It's being added as a calculation that you can use if you feel like it. Does that make sense to you? So in a measure, what you would do is something like, okay, I want to know acquired value minus year-to-date depreciation or something like that, or basis minus year-to-date depreciation. Okay, so I want to do that, but I don't want that as a column here, right? What I want to do is I want to do, right up here at the top, a new measure. So I'm going to go to Table Tools, New Measure. I'm going to call this measure, it's going to be called current basis. And the current basis is going to be equal to the basis minus the depreciation. Okay, so basis, oops, current basis is equal to asset depreciation square brackets basis minus asset depreciation square brackets year-to-date depreciation. Okay. Then I hit enter on my keyboard. Oh, I think I hit escape on accident. Sorry about that. Yeah, let's try that again. All right, so once again, table tools. I'm on the asset depreciation table. I make a new measure, and this is going to be called current basis. Minus the year-to-date depreciation. I'm a little, there we go. Okay, so I have now made this thing called current basis over here on the right, but I want you to notice that my basis did not get added to the table. Does everybody see that? That's the most important thing I want you to think of. Now, if I want to know, let's say, total of the current basis, I can come over here to my charting, and I can take the current basis and drag that right onto the page. Oh, I have to fix it. Anyway, I can use anything that is in there. So I'll do year-to-date depreciation, drag that in, and use it as part of the chart. So you can use a calculated column as part of a chart, or you can use a measure as part of a chart. The question is, Do you need a column on your table? Does the column actually need to physically be on your table, or could it just be a calculation that is available to you for charting with? So that's why there are two different types of calculations when you work on your tables. The reason there are two different types of calculations is because some calculations need to add another column to the actual data set, and some just need to be there for the purposes of charting. That's going to save you a ton of file size and processing time when things don't get processed during that stage of things, okay? Okay, so here, right before we take our break, which of these tools seems to be the most important so far to you? ETL from Power Query, or modeling your data in Power Pivot, or you're going to use a little bit of both? I mean, you're obviously going to use a little bit of both, but which one feels like the stronger tool for the way that you need to be able to work moving forward? Is it important to be able to extract data, clean it up, and do it quickly and effectively? Or is it more important to you to be able to establish that there are relationships between tables and do those calculations easily?